Welcome back to channel 626. I'm Mitchell, and this is a breakdown of Phineas and Ferb, One Good Scare Ought to Do It. This is another two-part episode where the boys make a haunted house, Candace gets attacked, and we get a heavy dose of sarcasm from Doofenshmirtz. Also, I caught a detail in this episode that I've never seen before, which actually explains an Easter egg that I pointed out in a previous video, and is a really cool bit of continuity. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Alright, we'll start with Phineas and Ferb's adventure in this episode. We first see them practicing a mariachi tree, which is basically just a mariachi band in a tree, before Ferb falls down and knocks everyone to the ground. This is actually one of a handful of episodes where the boys start off doing something before pivoting to their main activity for the day, which in this case is going to be a haunted house. Phineas chalks up the mariachi tree idea to drinking too much chocolate milk beforehand, which could be a kid-friendly way of saying you drank too much alcohol before planning something, which also could lead to a mariachi tree type idea. And when Isabella stops by and tries to say, "What you doing?" the day's activities are set into motion. She has a bad case of the hiccups, and Phineas and Ferb are going to try to scare him out of her. Isabella says that there was a scary haunted house at the state fair that she went to, and that gives Phineas and Ferb the idea to make their own haunted house. And when Candace overhears their plan, she says, "The only way you're building a haunted house in our backyard is over my dead body." And Phineas responds with, "That's the idea," which is an exact quote from Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope.
"For my dead body."
Then we get a classic Phineas and Ferb building montage, which is happening behind Candace's back, just like in the roller coaster episode and in the title sequence. Here we see them bringing out a guillotine, a corpse, a knight in armor, and a shrunken head. Then Phineas tells Candace that he lost some snakes in the house, which could be a callback to several previous episodes where he included rubber snakes in the day's activities. Just kind of a weird continuity thing there. Then the Fireside Girls, Buford, and Baljeet all show up to help. And if you look closely, you can actually see Ginger eyeing Baljeet next to her, which is the first of many breadcrumbs leading to their eventual future relationship. Phineas says, "Buford, I know this is cutting into your canasta game." And for those of you who don't know, canasta is a rummy style card game. Buford responds by calling Phineas Pointy, which is one of many nicknames that Buford gives to Phineas that refer to his triangle head, including Dinner Bell. The haunted house that they make is controlled by an organ, which is a nod to a classic horror trope as seen in The Goonies and other movies. And while Phineas is demonstrating it, he accidentally sends Ferb flying into the air and through the haunted house. Then Isabella shows up to get her hiccups scared out of her, and she gets swarmed by bats in a sequence that looks a lot like the beginning of Scooby-Doo. But even a very scary haunted house isn't going to stop her from holding Phineas's hand as he guides her through the haunted house experience. As they start off, we can see Ferb playing the organ, which isn't just ominous, it also shows how the haunted house is being controlled. They pass a bunch of spooky stuff, but I actually think the scariest of all is this toilet out in the open. No thanks, I need my privacy. And there are a bunch of allusions in here to Disney World's Haunted Mansion, including these busts on the wall. And here we see the knight armor, which the boys brought past Candace's window earlier. Then they run into Baljeet's attempt to scare them with a failed math test. And when they run off, instead of saying, "You can run, but you can't hide," Baljeet says, "You can run, but it won't be to the college of your choice," which is a good reminder to study hard in school, kids. Next, we see a robot and these creepy girls closing in around them, which is a reference to the horror movie The Ring. And then we get another Haunted Mansion reference where we see these paintings, which look normal at first, but then they light up, showing something scary. Then it's time to see what Buford thinks is scary, and it turns out it's Suzy Johnson. We'll find out a little later in this video why Suzy Johnson is scary, but for now you can just take my word for it that she is. As they leave, we can hear Buford say, "Wash away the horror, wash away the horror," as he washes his hands, which is a reference to Shakespeare's Macbeth.
"Let all these hands never be clean."
Then they go through the rest of the experience on a roller coaster, which is a reference to the 1990s animated show Beetlejuice. Throughout this entire experience, we hear a spooky song called One Good Scare, which sounds similar to the soundtracks from Nightmare Before Christmas and other similar movies.
One little scare ought to do you some good.
Unfortunately, however, Isabella still has the hiccups after all that. So they raise the antenna to try to up the scariness factor by hopefully getting a lightning strike. And although they don't end up getting the lightning, the antenna raising is eventually what leads to the thing that's scary and stops Isabella from having the hiccups. Because just then, Doofenshmirtz's ship flies by and attaches to the haunted house, pulling it up with Phineas still in it. Here we get a quick cameo from Django running away. And when Phineas falls, Isabella and the Fireside Girls use their sashes to brace his fall, and then Isabella catches him, saying,
"Now that was scary. Hey,
My hiccups are gone!
But unfortunately for her, the very last thing we hear after the credits roll is Isabella hiccup and then say, darn.
Darn.
At the end of the day, we get this exchange between Phineas and Ferb.
What did you think the scariest thing was?
Definitely the giant floating baby head.
Yeah, where did that come from?
And that question is actually never answered. The giant floating baby head continues to show up in future episodes, and we never get an explanation of why it's there or where it came from. All right, let's check in with Candace to see what she was doing through all of this. The episode actually starts with Candace practicing talking on the phone. This is something that kids today will likely never actually need to do. But back in the day, before cell phones, and when you had to walk to school uphill both ways, you actually had to use a home phone to call someone. And if you were calling a crush, you had to worry about someone else picking up the phone on the other end, like maybe their parents. And you'd have to be ready to have that conversation, and it was this whole big ordeal, and Candace is very prepared. She's doing a lot of practicing and has her notes ready. And actually the joke she practices with is this.
So what do you get when you cross a yak and a Martian?
And we see a yak and a Martian, both drawn in her book, right next to what looks to be maybe a chicken crossing a road. Good thing she didn't go with that one. And her roleplay is embarrassingly interrupted by her mom.
Honey, could I interrupt for just a sec?
Why, Jeremy Johnson, did you just call me honey?
No, Candace.
Her mom also roasts her for using a banana phone.
I hope you're not planning on talking to that banana all afternoon.
Which might actually be a reference to the popular Raffi song.
Banana phone.
And when Candace learns what the boys are doing, she runs to call her mom, but stops, saying,
And I am not using the banana this time!
Which is one of my son's favorite lines to quote. When Candace actually goes to call her mom, she gets off a kid-friendly version of this common phrase.
Build a haunted house my foot!
But it turns out that Linda is actually at Jeremy's house for the book club. So when she calls, she gets Jeremy on the other line, and she was not prepared, totally catches her off guard. So she takes a moment to regain her composure and then calls back. Unfortunately for her, this time Jeremy's little sister Suzy answers the phone, which is basically a worst case scenario. She sees right through Candace and knows that she wants to talk to Jeremy. And even though she eventually does pass the phone call off to Jeremy, it's not before she gets in this ominous warning.
But never, ever forget, I am and always will be Jeremy's favorite girl.
Jeremy then invites Candace over, and she decides that the perfect look for this event is, and let me check my notes here, Girl Next Door meets Pop Diva meets Hollywood Bad Girl crossed with an old school glamour goddess. Whew, that's a mouthful. And like the calm before the storm, she rides her bike to the Johnson's house, and everything seems to be going perfectly. But when she gets there, Suzy's looking ominously out the window, holding her dog, and closes her shades, which is a reference to Silence of the Lambs. She then sabotages Candace by sending her dog to attack her, turning on the sprinklers to get her wet, and then driving an RC truck and spitting mud up in her face. When Jeremy eventually comes out and then doesn't believe that Suzy was capable of doing all that, Candace says, I should leave while I still have a shred of dignity left, which I'm pretty sure she doesn't. When she gets home, she sees the haunted house and goes in looking for the boys. Big mistake. The first scare is from the Fireside Girls, which makes sense because when Isabella went through, we saw the scare from Baljeet and Buford, but not from the Fireside Girls. Then we get another Haunted Mansion reference with this floating candle. Then Candace pulls a Scooby-Doo, running through all these doors and defying logic. While she does, the rest of the Fireside Girls chase her in a dragon costume. And then 3 skeletons come out, which is a reference to the classic Disney short, The Skeleton Dance. And then we see the giant floating baby head for the very first time. Candace speeds through the rest of the haunted house, going through the same experience that Isabella and Phineas did. But when she bumps into Buford and Baljeet, she recognizes Buford's scary costume as Suzy, and they both scream. At the end, she chews out the boys for the haunted mansion and then takes the elevator down, but the giant floating baby head tries to follow her. And actually, if you listen closely, you can hear that the elevator music is just an upbeat, kind of light and happy version of One Good Scare.
One good scare ought to do you some good.
Would you get out of here?
When she tries to show her mom, the haunted house is already carried off, and Baljeet ends up catching a stray.
These little creeps have destroyed our backyard, leaving this ugly mess in its place.
Linda remarks, that wasn't very nice, Candace, which is very similar to what she said to Lawrence back in the time travel episode. But then the haunted house lands in their backyard again, just in time for Candace to go get her mom. And when she comes back, Baljeet gets it again.
It's returned.
Oh, excuse me, I forgot my satchel.
Then Isabella shares her tip about having the hiccups to get showered with attention from the boy you care about, and Candace ends up using that to her advantage. During all this, Perry was having his own adventure as usual, so let's check in on what he was doing. He tried to sneak into his lair by jumping into a trash can chute, but It turns out he just jumped into the normal trash can at first, and then had to jump into the correct trash can, which shot him down to his lair, and you can see trash come down with him. Major Monogram then briefs him, giving him two possible explanations of Doof's whereabouts. One, that magical elves abducted him and took him to the land of angry corn people, and the second is much more realistic, and they say he could be on this island with a hideout in the exact coordinates where they lost his tracking signal. And as Monogram's explaining that second one, he realizes how absurd the first one was. Perry then hops in his hovercraft and takes off to an extended version of his theme song along with a music video. So let's break down what we see in this music video. Most of the scenes are actually net new, but we do get a couple callbacks. So let's start with the new scenes. Perry turns around against the black background, running with footprints, flying his hovercraft underneath a helicopter, controlling Doof's robot and hitting him in the head, jumping off a building, swinging off a rope, riding his moped, hanging from a helicopter, and jumping off an exploding tank. We also get the part where he does his chatter when the woman swoon, and actually this lady here I've mentioned in previous videos, but she shows up as a background character in several episodes. And then we get to the scenes from previous episodes. This first one, he jumps off the jet ski just like he does in the Magnificent Few, but it's not the exact scene. We see him fighting Doof in the backyard beach party of terror, then them fighting on the blimp in The Fast and the Phineas, the actual scene of him jumping off the jet ski from the Magnificent Few, getting into his submarine from Are You My Mummy, running past Doofenshmirtz in Flop Stars, and that's it for the musical montage. But there is a cool blink and you miss moment where Perry's just flying his jet to the secret island, and I just think it looks cool. When Perry arrives at the hideout, he gets trapped against a box. And note here that the trap actually restrains his tail, which shows that Doof is learning, because in a previous episode he only restrains Perry's limbs in a trap, and then Perry's able to use his tail to escape. Then Doofenshmirtz sarcastically explains how he predicted all of this to happen, and that this is his mentor's hideout, Professor Destructicon, which actually makes a lot of sense, because back in the time travel episode, we see Doofenshmirtz reading this book called Evil 101 by Professor Destruct, and we can't actually make out what the last part of that word is. And I had assumed that it was Professor Destruction, but actually it makes a lot more sense for it to be Professor Destructicon, because that's Doofenshmirtz's mentor, so it makes sense that he's reading his book. And we see where Doofenshmirtz gets his nonsensical evil plans from, because apparently his mentor was going to set fire to the sun. Doofenshmirtz then explains how he plans to leave Perry there and disintegrate him and the entire hideout with his disintevaporator. And when he's gathering his things to load up, we see the framed photo, which shows up in several episodes, including the time travel one. But Doofenshmirtz misplaced his keys, and Perry's able to sneakily grab them under his foot. Agent P then uses his leverage and doesn't tell where the keys are, and Doofenshmirtz responds by saying, "I'll find my keys myself and teach you the meaning of grace under fire." And 1 second later, he shows the exact opposite of grace under fire.
Please, I'll do anything. Oh, for the love of great Caesar's ghost, what would you have me do?
And did you catch that? He says, "For the love of great Caesar's ghost," which is actually a reference to an old Superman show.
Great Caesar's ghost, are you gonna wear that outfit into the junk?
Then Perry uses his leverage to have a little fun with Doofenshmirtz. They finally strike a deal, and Doof takes off in his jet. But he quickly realizes that both Perry and the disintevaporator are on the jet with him. So he and Perry duke it out, and Perry gets caught up in Christmas lights, just as he will in the Christmas Vacation episode. But once Perry gets tossed out of the jets, the Christmas lights unravel and actually attach to the haunted house, pulling it up into the sky. Then the disintevaporator lands on it, and Perry makes it away safely. All right, let's show the running gags from this episode.
Definitely the giant floating baby head.
What you do? Yeah, I just came by to see what you do. Hi, Phineas. What you do? Phineas?
Hey, where's Perry?
Doofenshmirtz hideout shaped island. Doofenshmirtz mentor's hideout.
Oh, there you are, Ferb.
That's it for One Good Scare Ought to Do It. Thanks so much for joining me for this breakdown. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Halloween episode of Phineas and Ferb is. And if you want to see breakdowns of more Halloween episodes, make sure to check out these videos. And until next time, remember, there's no platypus controlling you.
There's no platypus controlling me. Well, it counts. It does.